Oh my God. They're right in front.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here. How many of you are joining us for the first time this evening? Wow, a lot of you. Well, you are very welcome. The place where you are is the only literary nonprofit that solely focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction. And we do this through public events like this one, reading groups, writing workshops, our Kids Read program, our first novel prize, and our Emerging Writers Fellowship. Please, especially if you're local, please follow us on social and sign up for our mailing list so you don't miss out on anything happening here. And to support our work, please consider becoming a member and enjoy all the perks that come with membership. Welcome to those of you who are joining us tonight via the live stream as well. After the talk, we'll have a brief audience Q&A, and if you're here, please raise your hand and one of our fabulous interns will bring a microphone to you. Please use the mic so the guests on the live stream can hear you as well. And for those of you on YouTube, please add your questions to the chat and we'll read those before we break for the evening. After the event tonight, the cafe and bar will be open and serving until 8:30. So if you want to mingle and chat with people, please stick around. Tonight's event is part of our Art of the Short Story series, which focuses on the form that many writers learn the craft of storytelling through, one that makes space for innovation, experimentation, and formal invention. At their best, short stories form indelible impressions on the reader. Tonight's event focuses on the stories of Diane Oliver, a writer who was just entering her power when she tragically died in a motorcycle accident in 1966. And if you're doing the math, that was 58 years ago. That this collection is now in print and soon to be in your hands to read is a story in itself, and I'm thrilled to welcome three great writers, Samantha Chang, Tayari Jones, and Dawnie Walton, who have traveled from near and far to share their love for Diane's work and to tell the story of how we all ended up here tonight. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Hello, it's a real delight to be here and a big honor to be here as well. I'm Samantha Chang. I'm director of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and it is, I think, in that capacity that I'm here tonight as a representative of the program from which Diane Oliver received her MFA. As I said, I'm delighted and honored to be part of an event to celebrate the recovery of an important voice in American literature and a graduate of the workshop, Diane Oliver. I'm going to talk a little bit about Diane's life because she can't be here. And I'd like to acknowledge Cassandra Jensen, whose article in the Iowa Magazine provided some of the information about Diane's life that I'm about to share with you. Diane Oliver was born in 1943 in Charlotte, North Carolina. She came from a family of teachers. Her mother taught piano and voice lessons. Her father was a teacher and school principal. Growing up in McCrory Heights, an African-American neighborhood in then segregated Charlotte, she developed a love for words at an early age. Her grandmother introduced her to Black poets such as Paul Laurence Dunbar and James Weldon Johnson, and she quickly became a passionate reader. By the age of 13, she aspired to be a writer. In high school, she nourished her love of writing and thrived, winning the annual Betty Crocker Homemakers of Tomorrow writing contest and working on the school newspaper. At the same time, she was also a witness to the early days of racial racial integration. She was friendly with Dorothy Counts, who left their segregated high school in 1957 to become the first black student at Charlotte's all-white Harding High School, an event that became international news. Oliver herself would go on to the front line of racial integration when she enrolled in Women's College, now the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, to help integrate the predominantly white institution. At Women's College, Oliver attracted a wide and diverse circle of friends, eagerly pursued her academic and journalistic ambitions. She enrolled in grammar, literature, French classes. She became the only African-American staff member of the school newspaper, the Carolinian. She also began writing short stories, inspired by her environment and worldly events. She was stirred to write by the Cuban Missile Crisis, her writing classes with novelist Peter Taylor and poet Randall Jarrell, the sit-ins, which morphed into student boycotts of restaurants and picket lines on the street corner. Her story, The Closet on the Top Floor, which we might talk about a bit tonight, and was published a few years after, might have been inspired by her observations then. It features an alienated black student who disappears from a white woman's college that she is integrating. By the time Oliver was a senior at Women's College, she'd become the managing editor of the Carolinian and a major supporter of the local civil rights protests. She had also amassed a considerable number of achievements. She won a summer guest editorship in New York at Mademoiselle, a place at the Experiment in International Living program where she would study French and live with a host family in Switzerland, and a full graduate scholarship to the University of Iowa. Just before graduation, a reporter from the Carolinian interviewed her, asked her what she was working on. She said she was writing a story about a boy attending an integrated school. Since it appeared in the Swanee Review 2 years later, the story Neighbors has become her most anthologized work. When Diane enrolled at the Iowa Writers Workshop in the 1965-66 school year, she moved into an apartment in Iowa City's Gaslight Village, which still exists. And only the most intrepid students still tried to live there. Her teachers included Kurt Vonnegut, Richard Yates, Vance Borgelli, and Nelson Algren. She may have been the only non-white writer of her class. Nonetheless, she stayed socially and politically active. As a student, she was a local civil rights advocate and the publicity chairman for the Committee to Defend Iowa Students. It was at Iowa that Oliver wrote most of her oeuvre. Negro Digest published 2 of her short stories, Health Service and Traffic Jam, which we're also going to talk about, between 1965 and 66. Mint Juleps Not Served Here, which we're also hopefully going to talk about, was anthologized in Southern Writing in the 60s. Her work attracted Johnson Publishing Company, who offered her an editorial position. But merely days before she would graduate, move to Chicago, start a dream job, and continue on to what would have surely become an illustrious writing career, Oliver was killed in a motorcycle accident in Iowa City on Dubuque and Davenport, only blocks from the location of the workshop where it is today. This was a shock to all of her classmates, at least one of whom I believe is here this evening. Today, scholars have compared her work to literary giants such as Faulkner, Shirley Jackson, Alice Walker, but she was little known until very recently. In a 2022 article, cultural critic Michael A. Gonzalez wrote a tribute to Oliver. Literary agent Elise Dilworth was intrigued by the article and went in search of Oliver's stories, which astounded her. From there, Dilworth got connected to Oliver's sister, Cheryl, through the Iowa Writers Workshop librarian, Leah Agne. Dillsworth, who now represents Diane Oliver's literary estate, worked with the family to secure contracts with Grove Atlantic and Faber and Faber, who have just released this beautiful collection of Oliver's published works. Stories is introduced by author Tayari Jones, and celebrated also by Writers Workshop assistant professor Jamel Brinkley and Ursa short fiction co-host Dawnie Walton. I am again delighted to sort of turn it over to Dawnie and Tayari.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dawnie Walton, and I attended and graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop 50 years after Diane Oliver blazed trails there. It is quite a journey and a happy one to be holding this collection in my hands. There's so much to be grateful for, including, first and foremost, the fact that we have some of Diane Oliver's family in attendance here tonight. We have her sister, Cheryl Oliver, her niece, Kimberly McGregor, and her great niece, Sydney McGregor. If you all could maybe stand and be recognized. Thank you all so much for being here and for sharing Diane's work and her legacy with all of us, with the world. It is really powerful and special. We also want to say thank you to someone that Sam mentioned, Suzanne McConnell, also a workshop graduate who was a classmate of Diane's and contributed a lot to the work of both the Iowa Magazine writer and to Michael Gonzalez's work. Suzanne, are you here? Thank you. Thank you. So I became aware of these stories just about 2 years ago. And I had just started a podcast called Ursa Short Fiction with Disha Filya, who is the co-host, my co-host and the author of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. And Michael Gonzalez was working on this story about Diane. He had found the story Neighbors in an anthology called Right On. He loves archival work, and he was just going through this book and read this story and was so knocked out by the voice and by the themes that he went down a research rabbit hole learning more about Diane and her story. And as part of his reporting, he reached out to Disha, a prominent short fiction writer, and said, oh, can you talk a little bit about Diane Oliver and what her work means to you? And like most people, Disha said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with her work. She talked to me about it, and as a workshop grad, I was also floored because, I started the program at 40 years old. I had my own kind of anxieties about being in Iowa and being a bit intimidated and everything, and then to learn about this young woman who was 22 years old, even younger probably when she started the program, and probably the only person of color in her class. It is astounding the level of this work. And so Disha and I went on a little hunt for her stories. We found 4 of them online. Looking on Google Books, we found Traffic Jam and Health Service, which is sort of about the same young woman character. We read Neighbors, and we read Key to the City. And what was so amazing about these stories was just the range in tone. Most of the characters, most of the protagonists are Black women, but they are of all socioeconomic strata. The embodiment of many different perspectives, which we're going to talk about tonight. It was just incredible that she was doing this work at such a young age. And then to have this book, and to read even more of her work, which I believe her sister Cheryl was keeping and had upstairs in an attic, and was able to kind of share them with the world, is really incredible. I'm going to read a bit from The Closet on the Top Floor, which I think is kind of a companion piece to the title story, which I think Tayari is going to read from. Both stories are about integration, but from different points of view. Neighbor sort of explores the agonizing choices that parents must make for a child in that era. The Closet on the Top Floor is about a young woman, Winifred, who has spent her whole life kind of being the person to integrate schools and really embodies the anxieties. What's interesting about this, one thing Michael Gonzalez said in his writing about Diane Oliver is that it put him in mind sometimes of the work of Jordan Peele and the fact that it is eerie and dark and sort of darkly funny in moments. And that's what I really appreciate about this story, about this young woman in this college campus where she is the only one and sort of slowly slipping away. So this is a bit of a teaser. If you want to, read how the whole thing transpires, you have to get a copy of the book. The Closet on the Top Floor. They were all wearing white raincoats, but hers was a kind of pale blue, making her stand out from the rest. At the time, she was too busy to worry about raincoats, trying to move her luggage from the car to the 7th floor of Wingate Hall. And she was becoming frightened, too, looking at all those white faces pressed against the window panes. "Don't worry about it, chicken." Her father reached over and patted her on the arm. "We wouldn't be sending you here if we didn't think you could keep the pace. Just think," he smiled at her, "you'll be the first one to graduate from Green Hill. Is everything out of the trunk now?" She looked at her father and wished he would stop calling her chicken. He loved her, she knew that, but she was tired of being the experiment. She tried to remember how it had been before, and she wondered how it would be when it was over, how she would feel seeing nothing but dark faces day after day. She had lasted through 4 years of high school, and in 4 more years, she would be through. She could come or go, taking or leaving them as she pleased. Her father had worked hard, petitioning the trustees and threatening a court suit to get her in this college, and she had felt ashamed for not wanting to go. The school had a good reputation, of course, but who in her right mind would want to go to a Southern girls' college? At least Green Hill was a private school, and there would be no photographers hounding her. Her father said most people didn't even know she was coming. Lord knows he would change that. Suddenly, she felt herself tightening up, and she tried to remember the breathing exercises the doctor had prescribed for her. "Thanks, Daddy," she said. "I think they'll have someone carry up the footlocker." She leaned over and kissed him. "Now, Winifred, you be careful." A woman's face appeared at the window. "If you need anything, call home. For heaven's sake, don't wait like you did last time. We can afford the telephone bill." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "I'd love to see your room, dear, but climbing those steps wouldn't be good for my headache." Then, as slowly as it had risen, the head sank down on the foam rubber pillow and pastel yellow sheet spread on the backseat of the car. Watching the head rise and fall, Winifred felt nausea well up, then down, in her throat. Her mother was allergic to dust, and traveling made her uncomfortable. Still, she followed her husband on civil rights jaunts across the Southeast. She didn't mind sacrificing her health for the cause. "Well, that's it, chicken." Her father slipped a check into her hand and adjusted the rearview mirror. "Don't forget to write Aunt Millicent. She worries about you." Good Lord, she thought. First chicken, now Aunt Millicent? She suddenly wished the car would go home. "Okay, Daddy, I won't forget." He turned the key and the motor sputtered. "You get out of this rain. Don't want you catching cold." Her father put the car in gear and turned into the street, but not before a chubby hand rose from the back seat. Winifred watched the car turn the corner, picked up her portable hairdryer, and walked toward the dormitory steps. She listened to the raindrops falling on her coat as she walked hunched over, shielding the animal in her arms. He was a pink dog with orange eyes, and she was afraid he would get soaking wet because the plastic bag didn't cover his fur completely. Winifred registered for classes the day after she arrived. As her father had warned her, everyone pretended she wasn't there. Her roommate's name was Norma Parker. She had had the room all to herself until Winifred and the pink dog arrived for the second quarter. Winifred would have preferred a single room, but her father insisted that she be treated as any other student. So she had to take her chances with roommates. Norma was tall and slender with curly blonde hair, and her best friends didn't look like Winifred either. Ellen and Bonnie lived down the hall from her, and they had been friends since high school. All three were chemistry majors, and Winifred didn't see much of them since all of her classes were in the liberal arts building. To decorate her room, Winifred had moved in with a whole zoo. Aside from the dog, there was a small tiger with leopard spots guarding the dresses, a yellow bunny 3 feet high named Mandy, a green duck, and a fuzzy lamb. The animals were the first things she looked for when she woke up in the morning. As she crawled out of bed, she always had a vague notion that something was wrong. When she was unable to remember anything that bothered her, she would check the calendar on her desk to make sure of the date. With the date pressed into her mind, Winifred would carefully button her robe, make up the bed, and begin the 7 a.m. procedure. First, she would open the top dresser drawer, find her underwear, and arrange the pieces on the bed. This morning, she tiptoed to her closet. Norma never got up before 9 and brought back a green pleated skirt, green blouse, and green sweater. She put these clothes on top of the underwear, but not before she carried the bar pin jewelry box and pinned the clasp on the blouse collar. Quietly, she picked up the soap and towel, opened the bedroom door with just 2 squeaks, and walked down the hall. At that hour of the morning, the dormitory lights had not yet been turned on, and the porcelain on the water fountain almost glowed as the light from the end hall window shone across the surface. She walked to the middle shower before anyone else was up. The first week of school, she had tried all 3 showers, and the one nearest the door had a broken soap holder. The soap slipped through, fell on the tile, and melted under the force of the water. The shower on the other end sprayed too fine, and she disliked the peppery streams of water shooting into her ears. So she had decided always to be the first one in the middle shower every morning. And she had been too, she thought happily, removing a shower shoe from her beach bag. Only once had Edie Roddy gotten up early to study for a biology exam and beat her to it. Thinking of Edie Roddy upset her, and Winifred stayed in the shower longer than she meant to. She had to rush back to the room and comb her hair to get to breakfast by 7:40. By the time Norma awoke, Winifred was sitting in the basement of the library between the bound copies of American Girl and the American Journal of Sociology, studying history. Everybody was in a sorority but Winifred. She didn't mind. Somehow she had become used to not being invited, and when she received an invitation to a sorority tea, by mistake, of course, she very casually threw the envelope into the waste paper basket. She had a difficult time trying to think of something in which to major. Her mother had suggested drama, but Winifred didn't see how she could play the maid's part for 4 years. She was fairly adept in biology, but the department scheduled field trips throughout the year. And even if the motels were supposedly integrated, she hated to be involved in testing them. So she had to major in something that didn't involve people or embarrassing scenes. Finally, in the blank to fill in a major, she wrote history. There was nothing embarrassing about doing library research. She had nothing whatsoever to worry about studying medieval Europe. And I'll stop there.
I am a latecomer to the Diane Oliver party. I just found out about this book just a few months ago when I was asked would I take a look at it and consider writing an introduction. I learned that she was born in 1943, the same year as my own mother. And that is one of the things that motivated me to read about it, because so often we don't really know our mother's stories. Like my own mother was one of the first Black students to attend the University of Oklahoma. And Mommy really never even talked about that. You know, I knew this about, it's like something, you know, like you kind of know things about your mother's biography, but she never offered any details of it. And so I was intrigued by this contemporary of my mother writing her stories. And I read the first story, Neighbors, and I was completely sucked in. And I do believe that Diane Oliver is one of my literary foremothers, and someone would say, well, how can she be your literary foremother? You never read her work. You wrote your books and you never read her work. But I feel the same way you would feel if you went on Ancestry.com and found out that you had a relative, an ancestor. You wouldn't say that person isn't your ancestor because you didn't know, right? I believe on some kind of spiritual level, these stories were out there. I didn't know about them, but they were out there. And I feel influenced by her bravery and the way that she was not boxed in by kind of like the politics of respectability. I think that's part of the pleasure of her youth when she wrote these stories. She was only 22 when she died. And if you spend any time with young people, they will speak their minds. And she spoke her mind, she wrote her mind. And when you read this collection, you realize that because she did not gather these stories into a book, she didn't have the anxiety of being like, what is this gonna be as a book? So we have this kind of unfiltered view into the moment. I wrote in the introduction, I don't know if people still do this. When I was a kid, we made time capsules where everybody would have to bring something and you put it in a box and they would like bury it at the foot of a tree, and so that people of the future could dig it up and see what it is that we as children at Mount Zion Baptist Church, what we thought people of the future should see. I felt like this book was digging up a time capsule to see what it is that Diane Oliver wanted to leave for all of us. So I'm going to read from the title story, Neighbors. It's about a family on the eve of sending their little boy to be the first to integrate in elementary school. He's little, he's like about 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old. And you think about Ruby Bridges, that famous picture of her, adorable in her little pinafore dress, and she's walking and she has the policemen, the G-men, one in the front, one in the back. But what we don't see, she got the Norman Rockwell treatment. But what we don't see in that picture of her is that people were like throwing things at her. And when she went to school, she sat in the classroom all by herself with the policemen. She was all alone. Like she didn't, we kind of imagine, I think our imagination is that she integrated to school and she was on the playground. We assume there was hopscotch or something, but there was no hopscotch. And this is a family. They thought they were going to set it up. They thought they were going to send their little boy. They thought the neighbors were also going to send their children to the school. But then when it came time to go, their child was the only one. The other families had reconsidered, and their little boy was the only one. And people are, the part I'm going to read to you, someone has like thrown a rock and broken the picture window in the front of their house. And this is a point of view of the older sister as the family, it's the night before. It's like in between night and day. It's about 5 a.m., the day that he's supposed to go to school. And this is the sister's mind. She stood and tipped across the kitchen to her parents' bedroom. "Mama," she whispered, standing near the door of Tommy's room. At the sound of her voice, Tommy made a funny, throaty noise in his sleep. Her mother motioned for her to go out and be quiet. Ellie knew then that Tommy had just fallen asleep. She crept back to the kitchen and began picking up the dishes that could be salvaged, being careful not to go into the living room. She walked around to her father, leaving the broken glass underneath the kitchen table. "You want some coffee?" she asked. He nodded silently. In strange contrast, she thought to the water faucet that turned on with a loud gurgling noise. While she let the water run to get hot, she measured out the instant coffee into one of the plastic cups. Next door, she could hear people moving around in the Williams' kitchen, but they too seemed quieter than usual. "You reckon everybody knows by now?" she asked, stirring the coffee and putting the saucer in front of him. "Everybody will know by the time the city paper comes out," he said. "Somebody was here last night from the Observer. Guess it'll make the front page." She leaned against the cabinet for support, watching him trace endless circles in the brown liquid with the spoon. "Sergeant Kern said they'll have almost a whole force out there tomorrow," he said. "Today," she whispered. Her father looked at the clock and then turned his head. "When's your mother coming back in here?" he asked, finally picking up the cup and drinking the coffee. "Tommy's just off to sleep," she answered. "I guess she'll be in here when he's asleep for good." She looked out the window at the back door and the row of tall hedges that had separated their neighborhood from the white people for as long as she remembered. While she stood there, she heard her mother walk into the room. To her ears, the steps seemed much slower than usual. She heard her mother stop in front of her father's chair. "Jim," she said, sounding very timid. "What are we going to do?" Yet, as Ellie turned toward her, she noticed her mother's face was strangely calm as she looked down at her husband. "I keep thinking," her father said finally, "that the policemen will be with him all day. They couldn't hurt him inside the school building without getting some of their own kind." "But he'll be in there by himself," her mother said softly. 100 policemen can't be a little boy's only friends." She watched her father wrap his calloused hands, still splotched with machine oil, around the salt shaker on the table. "I keep trying," he said to her, "to tell myself that somebody's got to be the first one, and then I think how quiet he's been all week." Ellie listened to the quiet voices that seemed to be a room apart from her. In the back of her mind, she could hear the phrases of a hymn her grandmother used to sing, something about trouble, her being born for trouble. "Jim, I cannot let my baby go." Her mother's words, although quiet, were carefully pronounced. "Maybe," her father answered. "It's not in our hands. Reverend Davis and I were just talking day before yesterday about how God tested the Israelites. Maybe he's just trying us." "God expects you to take care of your own," his wife interrupted. Ellie sensed a trace of bitterness in her mother's voice. "Tommy's not going to understand why he can't go to school," her father replied. "He's going to wonder why, and how are we going to tell him that we're afraid of them?" Her father's hands clutched the coffee cup. "He's going to be fighting them the rest of his life. He's got to start sometime." "But he's not on their level. Tommy's too little to go around hating people. One of the others, they're bigger. They understand things." Ellie, still leaning against the door, saw that the sun covered the part of the sky behind the hedges, and the light slipping through the kitchen window seemed to reflect the shiny red of the tablecloth. "He's our child," she heard her mother say. "Whatever we do, we're going to be the cause." Her father had pushed the cup away from him and sat with his hands covering part of his face. Outside, Ellie could hear a horn blowing. "God knows we tried, but I guess there's just no use." Her father's voice forced her attention back to the two people sitting in front of her. Maybe when things come back to normal, we'll try again." He covered his wife's chunky fingers with the palm of his hand, and her mother seemed to be enveloped in silence. The three of them remained quiet, each involved in his own thoughts, but related, Ellie knew, to the same thing. She was the first to break the silence. "Mama," she called after a long pause, "do you want me to start setting the table for breakfast?" Her mother nodded. Ellie turned the clock so she could see it from the sink while she washed the dishes that had been scattered all over the floor. "You gonna wake Tommy up, or do you want me to do it?" "No," her mother said, still holding her father's hand. "Let him sleep. When you wash your face, go up the street and call Hezekiah. Tell him to keep up with the children after school. I want to do something to this house before they come home." She stopped talking and looked around the kitchen, finally turning to her husband. "He's probably kicked the spread off by now," she said. Ellie watched her father, who, without saying anything, walked toward the bedroom. She watched her mother lift herself from the chair and automatically push in the stuffing underneath the cracked plastic cover. Her face looked set, as it always did when she was trying hard to keep her composure. "He'll need something hot when he wakes up. Hand me the oatmeal," she commanded, reaching on the top of the icebox for the matches to light the kitchen stove.
I just love that word, commanded. It's like she takes up strength and she moves forward despite what they're facing that day. It's really powerful. I guess one of the things I wanted to start by asking both of you is, how do you see the sort of extraordinary intersection of this very courageous young writer with the times in which she came of age? Can we talk about that a little bit? It's really extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that from where we sit now, the question of integration is kind of a settled matter. And so, we don't have I feel like we don't have a good grip of the dilemma that parents face at the time. Like when we see that famous picture of Ruby Bridges, we don't ask ourselves, what were her mom and daddy thinking? We assume, like the song says, they woke up this morning with their mind stayed on freedom. That's what we assume, which is no doubt true. But I feel that with the immediacy, the time in which Oliver's writing, she was aware of the real cost of that. See, we live with the benefit of it. We know the benefit of it. And so the sacrifices seem worth it. Right? The sacrifices of the little Rock 9 were worth it. Things have changed in a meaningful way. But from where she was sitting, people were saying, was that worth it? And she can capture that question in her work.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the thing that is so astounding to me about these stories is, not just the fact that Diane Oliver was capturing history as it was being lived, but that she really got the drama of choices and all the complexity and nuance of every single little choice that people were making for their children and for themselves, honestly. And I think this book is like a wonderful, empathetic record of that era in time.
And some of these stories are wild. There's wildness in this book. There's a story where these people, they killed a social worker.
Yeah.
Social worker's like, we think your son should go into a program. They're like, really? So the range of people's responses to the moment. And we were just saying at dinner, I think that one of the many remarkable things is that she's not really constrained by being a representative. Mm-hmm. Like if she felt like she was being a racial representative, I don't think she would have had those people kill the social worker.
Right.
With a mallet. Yeah. And this was not the first one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it wasn't, it was integration, yes, these stories are concerned with that, but also just the tensions of the time, and the choices that mothers especially make.
Sure.
Diane Oliver, was 22 when she died. She tragically, wasn't a mother herself, but was really able, in a couple of these stories, health service and traffic jam, are with a mother who, her partner, the children's father, is not around very much, and she makes everyday choices, for instance, to make it to her job on time because her boss is awful. She's a housekeeper, and her white woman boss, expects her to be there on time. She has to leave her baby in a bassinet on somebody's porch, before they're awake, to take care of the baby and hope everything is okay every day. It's like those little things that she's looking at, the racial disparities, all of those things that were so on our minds at the time.
And the emotional life, though, is so real. Like, she has this horrible boss, which, many people do. Like, my daddy always says about work, they pay you because you don't want to go. If you wanted to go, you would have to pay them, and then it would be a vacation. So she has to go to work. She drops the baby off. She leaves the baby. It's not even a basket. It's like in a basket.
Yeah,
like a laundry basket.
Yeah.
She drops her baby off. And also her mind, in many ways, her mind is on her man also. Like, just this kind of romantic sexual life of the woman who works as a maid. If you notice, quite often when women are housekeepers in stories, they don't have a family, because you can't really make the case that your maid is part of your family if she has another family that does not have their mother, because she's over there pretending to be part of your family. Like, the maid's family disrupts the fantasy of what it means to have a woman living in your house, tending your house. And so in this story, yes, so her man, he is trifling, but kind of hot, though.
Yeah, and he pops up out of nowhere. She's at
but
her
you
job.
You get it. I got it.
She's doing laundry or something, and he pops up out of nowhere.
Hey, I'm back. I got a new car.
With this fancy, shiny new car.
He's like, don't you want to see my new car?
Yeah, don't you want to go for a ride in the car? And
she's like, we have bills. She's like, we have bills. Yeah. He's like, yes, but we also have a car. And this dilemma she has, and it's one of the things I really love about this work, is that this book, the characters, they you know, I'm sure you were taught when you were in graduate school or whatever, that if your story is going to be any good, it has to be about people and their problems, not problems and their people. And I feel like that is what she really gets here. This is about people and their problems.
Yeah, yeah. And I think my favorite line, and it's sort of this character Libby, you know, she really does want this man, and
He's kind of hot.
he's kind of hot,
He's kinda hot.
and that is so human. And there's a moment, my favorite line in the whole collection is, you know, going through her thought process, and she's like, oh, you know, I should be mad or whatever, but there's a line and she says, what was it? I'm going to mess it up. If she wanted him, she had to want the car. And that line knocked me out. And because that really, you know, this whole series is called The Art of the Short Story. And that, to me, that line just encapsulates so much about this character and about desire and all of those things in a single line. And so she gets in the car.
And I think it's important that we talk about how yummy these stories are.
Yeah.
I feel very often that, particularly with the work of Black writers, there's this sense of what is the sociological work this story's doing. And this is doing a lot of heavy lifting of the time, but also these stories were juicy.
Yeah, juicy.
Oh,
Juicy.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, I was eager to read each one of them, and I had, you know, a delightful experience reading them.
Yeah, what about when she married the guy that was passing? He was married. Yeah, see, look, she's blushing. And I think it is important to talk about that part of it as well. Like, I do think that a story should be a story you want to know what happens next. You know, it's not just a matter of, you know, eating your spinach.
Exactly. Exactly. These stories understand that. She understood that when she was 22.
Which is
that was really-
wild.
yeah,
Like,
I thought it
mean,
was really impressive.
the youth of this woman, I mean, like, I didn't come to the program until I was 40 years old, and even then I was questioning my voice and what am I about? And there's such a clarity in these stories.
Courageous. She has a courageous vision.
Yeah.
She's honest.
Doesn't it kind of remind you, like, I was thinking when I was reading it, oh, she was so young. How did she do this so young? But then I thought maybe she was able to do it because she was so young. You know how, like, some musical acts, some bands are really peak when they're very young. Like, the band is so awesome because they are so young. The fearlessness of youth.
Right, there's a fearlessness.
There's the fearlessness of you. She doesn't know yet these things that cause the rest of us to be fearful.
Or she does. I mean, she was a journalist all through college. She was the the managing editor of the paper, and wrote a lot, covered a lot. I wondered about that. I mean, maybe it's youthful courage, yes, but she did know, I think, a lot of the significance of what she was writing about.
Oh, I do think that she knew the significance, but like as we get older and we have more on the line, more fear, you know?
The consequence.
And in a way, although we do feel like there's a kind of a tragedy that we're only just now getting this book, but in many ways, I think this is a book that will thrive in this particular moment. Just even the way that she eschews respectability, I think that goes over a lot better today. As we were saying at dinner, do you all remember, am I the only person this age, do you all remember just the complete way there was just like Armageddon when The Color Purple was published? It was just like, this book is not a positive portrayal. People were picketing Alice Walker's reading with signs. Like, she would be trying to read and people would be protesting so loud outside the building you couldn't hear her talk, because she was not kind of using literature as a way to do kind of cultural propaganda, right? That we are the same as you, we are as good as you, we are
Or
kind
better.
of, yes,
Better.
or better. And that she was showing kind of the complexity of experience. So I think that, like, you know, like when these people I keep going back to when they killed that social worker. I feel that
The story is called No Mint Juleps Served
not
Here.
served here, yeah.
yeah, I feel like now is a better moment for that type of behavior.
Great.
Is there any other story you want to highlight?
I mean, well, let's see. I mean, I loved this story, The Keys to the City.
Key to the City.
That's a good
Key
one.
to the City.
So many good ones.
It was a tremendous story. It was,
Tell us more.
well, it was so detailed and so complete, and it had an incredible sense of narrative tension. I mean, I felt like she understood instinctively a lot of the things that we talk about in workshop.
Yeah. There's a real buildup. It's a story, again, like Neighbors. It's sort of the protagonist is the older child in a family, and the story is front-loaded with this older child kind of following her mother's orders. They're getting ready to move from their small town in the south to, I think it's Chicago. They're going to Chicago, where the father is supposed to be waiting for them, and supposedly he has this job, and he's prepared for them to come, and there's a whole big send-off in the town, and it's, you know, all these steps to them getting ready to go.
Touching details.
Yeah, just like in actually Closet on the Top Floor, there's so much attention to the tiny details that it's almost like meditative a little bit. And then, you know, I don't want to spoil the story, but there's a sort of twist at the end that sort of puts all of this painstaking detail in relief and in perspective. And we're talking about the endings of these stories, and I always think like the endings is like a good ending is a beginning of a whole other story, and that's how this one ends. It's probably my favorite ending in the collection, actually. Yeah.
And I really love the one where this woman, she's married, and her stepdaughter is coming to visit. And the stepdaughter is coming to visit on the train, and the stepdaughter does not like her. She don't like her at all. And she won't talk to her, and she just wants to be with her own mom. And that question of, you know, blended families that don't really blend, and to be doing it at that time. Because, you know, there's a sense we have in our current moment that we've just started blending families recently. And this kind of predecessor of the kind of the drama with divorce and everything that we have now in class, and, you know, and she does not work it out happy ending wise. She don't like her at the beginning, she don't like her at the end. She's just never gonna like this lady. And it's about learning how to not be liked. But it was really, I thought it was moving and insightful and kind of, I don't know, how would you describe it? I wouldn't say Real Housewives, because that is pejorative, but really compelling, right?
I think juicy is a good word for all of this.
Just the range of Black life that she portrays. You know, it is said that most Americans don't know anyone from another socioeconomic class, don't have a close relationship with someone from a different socioeconomic class. But particularly in the time she wrote, for African Americans, absolutely. You know, what Black people call people from other socioeconomic classes, we call them our first cousins, right? Because when integration happened, very often families were split, where, like in my father's family, the older kids grew up in segregation. The younger kids had the opportunity to go to college, which means that you have first cousins that had very different experiences, but they're our first cousins, so that there's this way of witnessing many different ways that people live. And I feel like Diane Oliver seemed to have firsthand observational experience, if not lived experience, with a lot of the different ways that people live. So we have people in the rural community going to the health clinic hoping to see a doctor and being sent away. But then we also have, you know, this woman with her stepdaughter, you know, she's a doctor's wife, and she's having a fancy tea party, and all of it rings very true, authentic, and no one's life is held up for mockery. And no one is seen to be having a more authentic experience than any other character. She understands that Blackness contains multitudes.
That's really great. On that note, I believe that we have a few minutes to take questions from the audience. Suzanne, would you like to start?
We'll come over with a microphone. So, first of all, I just want to say that I had such a deja vu seeing Diane's sister Cheryl. If you want to know what Diane would have looked like, she would have looked like Cheryl, because when you walked in, I got chills. So I was in the workshop with Diane. I want to correct a couple of misperceptions. There were, in my recollection, 4 Black writers in the workshop. Oh my God, Weidman.
John Edgar Wideman.
John Edgar Wideman, Lorraine O'Grady, who became a visual artist, was in the
Sure.
workshop. And there was another guy whose name I don't remember, and I don't think he was having mental health issues and was in and out of the mental institution, but so was Richard Yates, our teacher, so it wasn't a big deal. And I knew Diane from the workshop, and the neighbors was on the worksheet. And it blew me away then, because one of the things you're talking about, how amazing it was that she wrote those stories so young, the courage and all that. But you have to remember that at that time, young people were making choices. We were making choices about the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. We were making choices about the civil rights movement. And if you were in a situation where you had to make those choices, something had to happen. So it was people were making very adult choices right in our lives. Mm-hmm. She was, another thing I just want to share, that there was a context to Diane's death. She died from a motorcycle accident, but there were 2 other people who died the same week. And without those deaths, hers might not have happened. So it was Black's Gaslight Village. She did not live at Black's Gaslight Village, actually. She had a very good friend there. I lived there. $50 a week, $50 a month. That's why I lived there. She had a very good friend, a white guy. He was from Georgia. I think the bond had to do with them both being from the South and going through those things. And so she hung out a lot there. But she was also in the workshop. And the first 2 deaths were students who lived at Black's Gaslight Village. And we were going to have a pig roast, which was a kind of Iowa spring tradition. Vance Borgelli always had a pig roast. We were going to have one ourselves. But then these 2 students died. So we put it off for a week. And the next week, we had it, but it was kind of a mournful, rageful occasion. But Larry invited Diane, and she was there. So it was at the end of this outrageous communal gathering that she went on the motorcycle ride. And I think for all of us, and for me, this 3rd death was just too much. And also because it was Diane, and she was young, gifted, Black, beautiful, a wonderful writer, and it was just too much. So for me, this is the most incredible salvation and resurrection, not just of Diane and her work, but also an incredible confirmation of writing, of the workshop, and of putting yourself forth. So, hooray.
Other questions?
And we have time for one more question.
There's...
I just wanted to ask Diane's family, how are you feeling? I know that's a huge question, but...
An extremely amount of emotions, varied emotions. Surreal, excited, happy, incredible, amazing. I need new words.
Just very thankful to be here, and just very grateful, especially to Tayari, because in terms of her doing the introduction, she's one of my favorite authors. So I was just very thrilled and excited when I heard that she was going to be doing the introduction. But just excited to be here, and just really excited for my mom to have this opportunity as well.
Hi, I'm the great niece. I'm Sydney. It's just really amazing to see what all she was able to do at my age. I'm actually 23. So it's actually really amazing to just see all of these people come together all the years later and just witness all of her glory. So, yeah.
And that's on that lovely note. Thank you so much for coming.